Vote counting for the snap presidential election is inching closer to an end as we come on air. But numbers already indicate the Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung will be the country's next leader. He will soon appear to claim victory. Who is Lee Jae-myung soon to become the president-elect? We turn to Professor Han Shadol for now. Thanks for joining us.
Nice to see you, Dami. Thanks for having me.
Professor Shadol, what a night we saw. I'm sure you stayed up all night to watch the vote counting, right?
It's been an exciting night.
Yeah. How did you watch the whole election unfolding, this whole process for the past few hours?
Well, elections are always fascinating. This one seems to be turning out true to form. The polls have been showing consistently the Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung was likely to win a commanding victory, and that became even more likely given that the two conservative candidates did not end up uniting. There was some suspense a few weeks ago when we were looking at some of the polling numbers. So there was a period when support for Lee Jae-myung in the polls went below 50%. It was, depending on the poll, closer to 45 or 46%.
Right.
And that was suggesting a possible change in trend where Kim Moon-soo from the People Power Party, the Conservative Party, who was still about 10 points behind, but if he had paired up at that point with Lee Jun-sok, former PPP chair who is now running from his own political party, from the New Reform Party, there was some possibility that if they had pooled their resources, that maybe they wouldn't have quite won the election still, but they would have at least given Lee Jae-myung a run for his money. But the two of them did not join forces in the end. Now we can see in the numbers that Lee Jun-sok seems to be underperforming nationally, whereas Lee Jae-myung, as we now can see, he's holding on to this lead of over 50%. So very different from the election in 2017. That was an interesting comparison because in 2017, again, it was an election after an impeachment. Park Geun-hye had been removed from power that year. But in 2017, there were three candidates that had overall, the three of them, were a little bit more on the same playing field. We had An Chol-soo in the race, along with Hong Jun-pyo from the conservative side, and then, of course, Moon Jae-in. So Moon Jae-in won that election handily, but he only won it with 41% of the vote. This time around, the third-party candidate, Lee Jun-sok, was much weaker in the end. So it set the stage for Lee Jae-myung to win with more than 50% of the vote. And I think Kim Moon-soo also, even though he's been in politics for a very long time, he's had his stints as Gyeonggi province governor. Actually, he had the job even before Lee Jae-myung. And he's been a national figure. He ran for mayor of Seoul, but he never could quite close the deal, whether it was mayor of Seoul or now for the presidency. Despite his stature within the party, he didn't quite have the kind of household name that Lee Jae-myung, by contrast, was able to build up for himself. Going back, I think, to the 2017 election, again, that year is significant because not only was that a comparable election to this one, but that was the year that actually Lee Jae-myung catapulted into the spotlight. He had been mayor of Seongnam, a large city to the southeast of Seoul, for 6 years before the 2017 election. He ran for president that year as a kind of challenger within the party to Moon Jae-in.
Indeed.
Moon Jae-in couldn't quite take that nomination for granted, even though he had been the standard bearer 5 years earlier. There was some people in the DP that still wondered if they needed somebody more exciting or dynamic, and Lee Jae-myung provided that. But of course, Moon Jae-in did prevail. Voters played it safe in a sense with somebody that they knew and a lot of them trusted in 2017. And then Lee Jae-myung, of course, moved up from there into the spotlight, again running for the presidency in 2022, coming so close to winning, just roughly 250,000 votes short. And here we are now in 2025, and he's finally seen his day.
I do have to remind you, it's been just 3 years. That's why the memories are still fresh.
Exactly.
Now, we are still waiting for Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung to appear to claim his victory. That is what we are seeing, the footage is live. But in the meantime, let's talk about his career transition. From a young factory worker to a human rights lawyer, now to a well-grounded politician again. What a career transition, right?
But I think one thing that has helped him with this career transition, Dami, is executive experience. And it's an interesting parallel that we see between South Korea and the United States. Korea has ultimately a stronger president than, say, the parliament. As strong as the National Assembly may be at times and as much leverage as it may have over the presidency, or if the National Assembly is in the hands of a different political party than the president, then it can make life very tough for the president. But at the end of the day, this country's political power leans very much in the direction of the presidency. And I think even with past presidents at times, that kind of executive experience has mattered. Lee Myung-bak, for instance, I think, he was able to close the deal with the voters back in 2007, 2008, having been mayor of Seoul. And Lee Jae-myung, having first been mayor of Seongnam and then governor of Gyeonggi province, and then making his way into the national stage, arriving in the assembly in 2022 and becoming the leader of the Democratic Party. In a way, I suspect that executive experience was a good way for Lee Jae-myung to kind of cut his teeth as a CEO of sorts of an enterprise, first the city, then the political party. Now he's got a chance as the chief executive of the country. We'll see what he does with it.
Speaking of experience, not all politicians go through, life-threatening moments or experiences, but he did survive an assassination attempt last year, right? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, this was visiting Busan, actually, going to a construction site there, traveling around. I think the actual knife attack happened in an airport. He was slashed in the neck. It showed how polarizing and toxic politics can be, not just in Korea, of course, all over the world. This was our taste of it. Again, I would compare it to what happened to the former U.S. ambassador here in Seoul, Mark Lippert, a decade ago. He was slashed in the face with a knife, as you may remember. Politics can be dangerous business.
Really?
And Lee Jae-myung's life, of course, as anyone attacked with a knife, it would hang in the balance. And yet he did remain conscious during that attack, and doctors were able to treat him. I think he went to Busan National University Hospital, and he survived the attack. And more to the point, he was also able to continue to consolidate power within the party and also win the confidence of voters in the election for the National Assembly in 2024. That was crucial because that's when the Democratic Party consolidated its power in the Assembly. Of course, that also set in motion the events that led to the downfall of the Yoon presidency. That's when we start to see these very harsh standoffs between the Assembly and the presidency.
Speaking of South Korea's a great polarization, that is why he, campaigned throughout the 3-week campaign period with a bulletproof jacket. That was also something notable, right?
Well, he was trying to win the confidence of voters across the country and meet people and shake hands. I presume he kissed babies, although I don't think I saw any video of that. But again, things happen, unfortunately. Even Donald Trump in the U.S. survived an assassination attempt last summer as well. So I can understand why anyone in the national spotlight would want to protect themselves. But yes, it's a sobering message.
This snap presidential election is taking place just a year after the 22nd general election took place in South Korea. Now, that also became a stepping stone for Lee to really solidify his party power, right?
Well, yes, because at that point, the Democratic Party, of course, had much more leverage over the president. At that point, the Democratic Party could make life very difficult for the president, and it did. And some of that polarization is apparently what drove Yoon Suk-yeol to the moment of desperation where apparently, and again, for maybe reasons that we'll never fully know, we'll see what comes out as the history develops, but that, of course, led Yoon Suk-yeol to take that sort of unthinkable move of declaring martial law here, exactly 6 months ago tonight. Come to think of it, it's poetic.
It's only been half a year.
Poetic in a way that we are exactly 6 months to the day where that happened. But this is also where Lee Jae-myung becomes world famous.
Right.
And again, you remember he and his wife, I believe, drove from their home to the National Assembly at moments after the martial law declaration was announced by then President Yoon. And Lee Jae-myung live streamed himself making his way onto the grounds working his way over the fence into the assembly compound and then joining forces with his colleagues. And it looks as if the speeches are proceeding here as the election comes to a dramatic climax.
Right. Well, that is why, Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung chose, Yeouido, where the National Assembly is located, as his last, stop for the campaign finale to really call for that end to insurrection, he says.
Indeed, I believe he had his final campaign rally there in
He did.
Yeouido as well. So, this has taken on a level of significance. And of course, Yeouido, as we all know, was a place where hundreds of thousands of citizens were also gathering in the days after the martial law decree.
Right.
Of course, hundreds, even thousands turned out that very night. Civil society was also a very big part of what happened after December 3rd. But civil society during this period was also looking to the DP as the party of constitutional democracy, the party of the rule of law, and I think that gave the DP the momentum it needed to advance in this election, this snap election that we had without expecting it.
Right. Well, I do have to mention that he's come a long way, as a politician. He did survive an assassination attempt last year, but I do have to say it was the martial law order that he really took advantage of, right, to, finally, pull the string on his election bid, right?
Well, he had a heroic image after that, and not just
right.
within this country, but I think globally. That video went viral. I think Lee Jae-myung became better known after thwarting the martial law decree, as opposed to in 2022 when he almost captured the presidency, but not quite. I don't think anybody outside the country would have remembered who he was had this martial law declaration not happened. So again, maybe Lee Jae-myung would have still won the presidency had the election happened 2 years from now. And in the usual timeline, we'll never know, right? We can't just have a controlled experiment where one Korea has martial law for a few hours and then has a snap presidential election following the impeachment and one doesn't. But I think this is true with politics actually. A lot of times accidental rises through whims of history,
right,
make or break careers, and that seems to have happened with Lee Jae-myung.
He is managing to get to the top office after 2 failed attempts, like you mentioned. That's why people say, it's not over until it's really over.
So now his challenge is to govern, and now his challenge is to show the population, I think, that he can try to bring the country together, not just try, but hopefully show a lot of sincerity with bringing the country together.
Definitely.
And delivering on a lot of the policy goods that in some ways both major political parties here have converged with over the years, but simply have not been able to deliver when it comes to making housing more affordable, controlling inflation, spurring along innovation, trying to keep the economy moving forward, which is increasingly difficult, I think, in a post-industrial advanced economy where, where we typically will see slower growth. Catching up with China. I've been reading a lot of columns in the business press that suggest Korea is falling behind China when it comes to innovation in a whole variety of areas. Of course, not just Korea, but a whole lot of other countries that were basically leading the high-tech globalization wave for the last 40 years. Japan has had the same problem. The US, in many ways, is also working to try to retain some sort of competitive edge at a point. When whether it's solar energy or artificial intelligence or robotics or electric car batteries and the like, electric cars as well. China right now it's no longer just an old line manufacturing economy that outsources much of the world's production. China is increasingly seen as driving a lot of high-tech industry global, and there's some concern that Korea is falling behind. And whichever political party won the election tonight was going to have to deal with this issue. Now that's up for Lee Jae-myung to work with, and he's going to have to find a way, I think, to build bridges across divides. So we will see the Democratic Party under his leadership over the past few years has not always been about building bridges. Yet now we'll see, and this is what I'll be watching for just as sort of an outside observer here, as an American teaching here, I'll be looking to see if Lee Jae-myung can find ways to articulate that he's going to be the president for all the people in Korea and try to heal wounds across divides and help the country clarify what would amount to the public goods it should pursue going forward and how to get there.
Indeed. Professor Shadow, we are still waiting for Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung to deliver his so-called victory speech on this election day. You know, while we wait for that, let's take a listen to what he said at his residence before he took off to the National Assembly in Yeouido.
네, 아직도 개표가 진행 중이어서 뭐라고 말씀드리기가 섣부르긴 합니다만 만약에 이대로 결과가 확정이 된다면 우리 국민들의 위대한 결정에 경의를 표합니다. 제게 주어진 큰 책임과 사명을 우리 국민들의 기대에 어긋나지 않도록 최선을 다해서 수행하도록 하겠습니다. 감사드립니다.
So that is what he said before he took off to the National Assembly. What did you think of the statement?
Well, he certainly has a vote of confidence now for the public, and he's going to have to work and deliver on that vote of confidence. So, you know, let's hope that he can indeed deliver on what he's promising and sincerely work on behalf of the public, and I think also restore faith in the constitutional democracy that I think many people, many Koreans that I know anyway, are very proud that this country has held on to its constitutional democracy through some periods of stress. I mean, the 2016-2017 period where, you know, leading to the impeachment of Park Geun-hye, and then the country continuing with the system working, with the court at that time removing the president from power, yet a peaceful transition of power happening after the election that followed. Again, very similar with the impeachment and removal from power with President Yoon as well, even though, you know, many continued to support President Yoon throughout that process. The rule of law, once it prevailed with the unanimous constitutional court decision, on balance, the people respected that decision. Even protesters that, you know, perhaps were signaling that they might not accept a verdict from the Constitutional Court. Once the decision came down, the public got behind that decision. Now the public is looking to Lee Jae-myung and the Democratic Party and putting their trust in Lee Jae-myung to deliver on the rule of law. You know, I think the people will hold him accountable. The president will have a honeymoon period. Every new president does.
All presidents do.
But the public will also be looking for this president to maintain integrity in power, especially after what the country's been through for the last.
You know, Professor
several
Shadow,
months.
we're going to have to come back to you after a month to, you know, review his progress report, whoever, you know, becomes the president of South Korea. Now, going back to Lee Jae-myung's remarks, he did appreciate the decisions made by the South Korean people, he says. Now, to prioritize people, you know, out of everything, anything, what do you think will be his, you know, first, the number one task in office?
Well, twofold, right? Any president has to manage domestic policy and foreign policy.
Right.
Again, the two parties have been in a relative agreement for some time that more needs to be done on the social welfare side and on the economic development side as well. Both parties actually support a shorter work week. I'm just coming down to very mundane, everyday life aspects. Would you like a shorter work week, Tommy?
Definitely.
You know, who wouldn't, right? And,
Exactly.
You know, the PPP has, I think, called for a 4.5-day work week. The DP is calling for a 4-day work week.
Right.
I mean, who am I to say what the president should do first? But maybe this is the kind of issue where the president and the political parties can come together with some sort of consensus as to how to go about a 4-day work week and, you know, bring the business sector on board and actually deliver something for the public here. Or again, take affordable housing. Think about all these young voters in their 20s and 30s that, you know, sometimes are quite disaffected. Even the fact that the third party candidate did better with the younger voters than with everybody else. It wasn't just, I think, that Lee Jun-sok is the young candidate himself, but also that younger voters have lost some trust and some confidence maybe in their elders. Or young voters are just tired of seeing the presidency or control of the assembly go from one party to the next. You know, maybe the parties with the DP in the lead, but also again trying to be a unifying political force, Maybe they can do something for housing prices here, affordability, or think about making some changes to the educational system that will take the stress out of going to high school for young people and make it more appealing for young adults to raise families and do something about the birth rate. So, these are fairly, bread and butter, everyday issues that you think government is always preoccupied with. But I think in Korea, these issues have a high level of salience. So maybe if if somebody were asking what I thought, I guess you are, Dami, if the president were asked, like low-hanging fruit for politicians to try to show the public how a better quality of life can emerge through the political process. These might be some ways forward with domestic policy, just for starters.
That is why people say it's the voters or people in their 20s and 30s who may be major force in deciding the election, right?
Oh, of course. And the voters are also the future of the political party. As we said earlier, that's something that the PPP is now going to find out the hard way as they try to regroup. They'll have to be looking to the younger voters to figure out where to go. Or whether they're going to go through yet another name change or rebranding or disbandment, who knows. And the DP, which already has a lot of young voters within its ranks, they'll be thinking about how to pass the torch to the next generation.
Oh, definitely. Well, it's also the swing voters and centrists. Who do you think they have already bet on?
Well, I'm very interested in the centrists.
Right.
And there was a really interesting story that just came out today in the international press. I think Reuters did the story. They were down in the central part of the country, down in Chungcheongnam-do, Chungcheongbuk-do, around the area around Daejeon, and even past that. And they did interviews with a lot of small business owners and mom and pop shops, for instance, a restaurant. And the restaurant owner was telling the journalist how she voted for Yoon in 2022, 3 years ago, thinking that at that point after the Moon Jae-in presidency with the DP, that maybe the PPP this time around, maybe President Yoon would do more for the economy. But then after the martial law decree, not only was that troubling in itself, but it was terrible for her business. That the day after the martial law decree on December 4th, even though martial law was gone, and that it was gone before the sun came up the next morning, still her business slowed. That very day, she was getting phone calls from customers that had reservations saying now they weren't coming. Very slow Christmas. We remember, of course, how muted this Christmas was, how office parties were canceled and end-of-year gatherings weren't quite the same if they happened at all. So now, I think this election maybe ends that chapter and people are hoping for a rebuilding of the economy.
Right,
as well
Professor Shadow, as we are speaking, Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung has arrived. He seems pretty happy, doesn't he?
He looks like he's about to triumphantly take the podium and give a victory speech.
This is what we saw 3 years ago, but now from a different candidate from the Liberal Democratic Party, it looks like he is about to deliver his victory speech to take the spot at the top office, right?
And with his hands up and hands high, gesturing an accomplishment here to the people, gesturing, I think, both victory and thanks to his supporters.
Definitely. We are seeing live footages of Democratic Party candidate Lee Jae-myung at the podium with his wife, about to claim the triumph of the 21st South Korea Senate presidential election. And this is when he will deliver his victory speech, Professor Shadow. Now, this is just the unofficial, claiming of the victory, right?
And I believe the votes are still being counted, correct?
Exactly.
So I think, the DP and, of course, the Lee Jae-myung campaign, they now have enough confidence, and I think enough news organizations are reporting that he seems to have clinched the election, so he feels confident to come out here and make a statement, and presumably we're going to hear him thank his supporters and say a few words about where he hopes the country will go.
Right. Well, vote counting is still underway, like you mentioned. It's been roughly over 5 hours since vote counting has kicked off. This is quite unprecedented. It took just about 5 hours to see the winner, right?
Well, election nights, you never know. We've been hearing with, really from just a few minutes after the polls closed, that the exit polling was in his favor. But the votes do take time, and you never know what surprises we might see at the very end. But his margin of victory seems solid enough where I think he can comfortably give a victory speech. This is not like 3 years ago where the victor was just less than 1%.
So he is speaking. Let's take a listen.
Honorable citizens, actually, at the moment, I am not pronounced as the elected president, but the possibility of me being the 21st president of the Republic of Korea is myself, Lee Jae-myung, and I greet you all. The Democratic Republic of Korea, the citizens of Korea, I'd like to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You have great expectations of me, and the mission that you entrusted me with will not be forgotten one moment, and I will execute it thoroughly. Last year, December 3rd, the night of insurrection, from that day until today, at this moment, you've gone through so many hardships, and you were desperately in the hope of many things, and one of them was that this country is a country of normal, ordinary citizens, and all the power of the president comes from the people, and that power is not used for the personal interest of the president, but it should be used for the future of the people and the bright future of the country, and you try to prove that point. And today, after 6 months from that day, we can finally oust them and make all of us the owner of the country. And with your vote, you had exercised your sovereign rights. Thank you. You entrusted me with the first mission is that to overcome insurrection and a military coup will never ever happen again, and to recover the democracy in this country and within the boundary of Democratic Republic, the sovereignty of the people are respected, and we will cooperate and respect one another. And that will be the country that I will uphold. And the second mission is to revive the economy and people's livelihood. As soon as I am the president-elect, I will do my utmost to resolve as soon as possible your predicaments, and it will be recovered. And the third mission is that the Republic of Korea will protect the lives and the safety of the people. In the past, our people
의심해야 했습니다.
had to be suspicious
국민들의
about why a
안전과 생명을
nation
책임질 그
exists,
책무를
and that responsibility
생각하지도 않았고
of
해야 될
protecting
기본적인
people's lives and safety
의무조차도 이행하지
was
않았습니다.
neglected.
대규모 참사가
And we have seen
수없이
so
많은
many
사람들을
disasters that took
떠나게 했습니다.
the lives of so many people.
국민의 생명과 안전을
The
지키는
lives of the people should be
국가의
protected,
제1의
and that
책임을
is the very
완벽하게
first
이행하는
mission of a state,
안전한 나라를
and I am going
꼭
to make
만들도록
a
하겠습니다.
safe state.
그리고 네 번째로
And fourth,
평화롭고
a peaceful
공존하는
and coexisting
안정된 한반도를
and
만들겠습니다.
stable Korean Peninsula
확고한
will be made
국방력으로
with
대북
steadfast
억지력을
military
확실하게 행사하되
preparedness. We are going to have a very
싸워서
decisive
이기는 것보다는
deterrence
싸우지 않고 이기는
against
것이
North Korean
상책이고
nuclear armament,
싸워서 싸우지
and
않고 이기는 것보다는
it is
싸울
better
필요가 없는 평화를
to
만드는 것이
win without
진정한
fighting, and
안보라는 확신을 가지고
without fighting we can make
남북 간에
peace,
대화하고
and that will be
소통하고 공존하면서
what I will
서로
always have in
협력해서
mind, and we will
공존,
coexist
공동
and
번영하는 길을
will
찾아가겠습니다.
co-prosper with North Korea.
한반도 정세를
The
최대한
dynamics
신속하게
of
안정화해서
Korean Peninsula
코리아
will
리스크를
be
최소화하고
stabilized as soon as possible so that we can reduce the Korea
우리 국민들의
discount
민생이
risk,
더
and
나빠지지 않도록
that the
최선을
livelihoods of our
다하겠습니다.
people do not deteriorate anymore.
마지막으로
And lastly,
우리 대한민국
the Republic
국민들은
of Korea, the people of the Republic of Korea,
이 공동체 안에서 서로
within our
존중하고
community, we will
함께
respect one
살아가야
another,
하는
and
동료들입니다.
we are colleagues who have to live with
지역으로
one another. It should
노소로
not be
장애인, 비장애인,
divided
정규직, 비정규직,
between
기업가와
areas,
노동자
regions, genders.
이렇게 틈만
class.
생기면 편을 갈라서
It should not be divided, and it should not be a place where we confront each other and have
혐오와
conflicts and
대결을
hate
넘어서서
each other. We will transcend that, and we will respect each other, coexist, and
함께
cooperate,
어우러져
and
행복하게
so that
살아가는
we can live
진정한 공동체,
happily and be a genuine community where people can live happily.
대동세상은
And
못될지라도
maybe it would not be a perfect utopia,
경계해야 될
but
적으로 느껴지지 않는
I will make a
필요할 때
country where we are not hostile to our neighbors,
함께 살아가는
but a
그런
place
공동체를
where
꼭
we can live with our neighbors
정치가 먼저 앞서고
happily and peacefully. So
정치가
the politics will be at the
이해관계
forefront,
때문에 다투더라도
and even if the
정치가
politics
편을 가를지라도
are
국민은
sometimes divisive, people
국민은
should not be
이
divided.
나라의
The
주인이고
people are the
정치는
owners of this
국민들의
country,
삶을
and politics
대신 책임지는
is
일꾼들입니다.
where are the workers of
편을
the
갈라 싸우는 건
people.
피할 수 없더라도
And
우리
even if the
대한민국
workers
국민들이 편을 갈라
may fight,
증오하고 혐오할
we
필요는
should not
없지
be,
않습니까?
and there's no need for us, the people, to
통합된
hate
나라,
each other. A united
대통령의
country,
책임은
the
국민을
responsibility
통합시키는 것입니다.
of the president is to have
큰
unity.
통치자가 아니라 국민을 크게 통합시키는
It's not a
대통령의
big presidency,
책임을
but the presidency that has the responsibility to
잊지
unite
않겠습니다.
the people. I will never
어우러져
forget
함께
that
살아가는
mission.
공평하게
Place
기회를
where
함께
people
누리는
are
억강부약의
harmonized and we
우리
live
함께
each
만들어가면
other
좋겠습니다.
and we live harmoniously with
우리가
the
겪는
vulnerable.
이 잠시의 어려움은
This
위대한
difficulty
영향을
momentarily
가진 우리 국민들이
will be momentarily
힘을
here,
합쳐
but when we
얼마든지
muster our strengths,
이겨낼 수 있습니다.
we can indeed overcome such difficulties. Let's have hopes high and have confidence,
함께
and with hand in
가시겠습니까?
hand with our neighbors, can we move forward and can we
이제는
march forward?
해야 되겠지요.
We should by now, shouldn't we?
자신이시죠?
Are you confident?
감사합니다, 여러분.
Thank you very much, everyone.
희망을 가지고
Let's have our hopes high,
지금부터는
and from now on,
새로운
it is
출발을 합시다.
a new starting point.
잠시 다투었지라도
We may have
우리를
fought
지지하지 않은
for
그분들도
a moment, but the people who did not support us, they are also the people of the Republic of
생각이
Korea.
다르고
We may think differently and we may have different status or have worn different color clothes. Now, from now on, we are all
대한민국의
the people of the great
똑같은
Republic of Korea, and we are all the same great people of the Republic of Korea. Let's go together. Thank you.
There, we just watched the Democratic Party's Lee Jae-myung claim victory for the 21st snap presidential election. Professor Shadow, Lee Jae-myung just delivered his victory speech where he really made sure to comfort South Korean people after going through, martial law order, and also stressed that the people, the power will come from people, right?
I agree, Nami. He covered a lot of important bases here. He started out by reasserting popular sovereignty, really, the idea that the government belongs to the people, that the election, of course, that helps him. The election can be interpreted as the will of the people, that it's the people who govern and the elected officials work for the good of the public. So he covered that. There was a very interesting reference as well in the speech to public safety. I think he was actually making some indirect references to the tragedies we've seen over the past 10 years with the Sewol ferry sinking back in 2014 or the Itaewon crowd crush. I'm sure that was what was on his mind and maybe on the minds of many people listening to the speech when he talked about the importance of keeping the country safe. But he also, and this seemed to be a really important theme in the speech, the emphasis on mutual respect across differing perspectives and differing groups, and I personally enjoyed hearing him say at the very end, yes, we may be wearing different clothing, we may be supporting different candidates. Of course, the PPP wear red, the DP wear blue, and the other parties all wear different colors, but then he argued that it's now time for the people to see themselves as one and united. So that's, again, as an observer of politics all around the world, that's often what I see in victory speeches as the leader, once they're elected, once they've got the majority, reassuring the country that, yes, people can be brought together after whatever divides were highlighted in the campaign.
Right. Call for national unity. Once again, South Korea is just hours away from kicking off a new government. Professor Shadow, since the inauguration is taking place, the ceremony is taking place just a day after the election day. Thank you so much for being with us on this historic day, Professor Shadow.
And thanks so much for having me, Dami. Much appreciated.
And we also thank you for staying with us. We will be back at 2 a.m. Korea time with all the highlights on Lee Jae-myung's victory claim and, of course, the 21st presidential election. Until then, goodbye.